Welcome back to Josh Bearhart's Reading Room. I'm Josh Bearhart Hawk, author of The Journal, GPS Signal Lost, Legends and Tales, Creepy and Fun Stories to Tell Around the Campfire, and other books that have been coming down the road. But you probably already know that if you've been watching the entire series. If you caught up to now, you know we're on chapter 20 of The Journal. If this is the first video you're clicking on, go back and watch the series. Start with chapter 1 and follow the story, because there's a lot of stuff happening, and we're building everything in. The next couple of chapters, the final 3 chapters that we've got coming up, and that ties everything together, and there's going to be some shocking twists and revelations that you're not going to want to miss out on. So make sure you're caught up on the entire series. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So chapter 20 is called Impossible. Samantha pulled into one of the parking spots marked Visitor and climbed out of the car. She knew this was going to be a long day, but it was work that needed to be done. For all they knew, Hermes Cantrell was some kind of serial killer who lured his victims with the promises of riches. She knew the odds were against that actually being the case, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Climbing up the stairs to the records building, her mind was on Heath. So much had happened over the days and weeks leading up to this moment that she hoped he would be all right on his own in that house. In the past, she wouldn't have worried quite so much, but now things felt different. From the moment she first met him, she knew he would be both trouble and someone who would make her life amazing. She had spent years searching for her purpose, and he seemed to offer something bigger than herself to focus on. Keeping him safe through some of the insane jobs he took on, and making sure the business stayed afloat as an actual business, took up most of her time. Dating never seemed to be an option, and she wasn't really concerned about it anyway. Her relationship with Heath was unconventional to say the least, but it was fulfilling in every way she needed. She approaching the front desk, she showed her ID to the receptionist and signed in. The records she would need to sort through were located on one of the lower floors, and the process of sorting through the boxes of files would likely take days. A cup of coffee was her only companion, but an acquaintance who used to work for the department had promised to try and stop by at some point to help. Going down 2 flights of stairs, she found herself in front of a door labeled Sub 2A, 1860 to 1940. As she entered the dark room, the smell of old papers and dust overwhelmed her. Much of her early 20s had been spent in a room just like this, and the scent was a familiar friend. Flipping the switch next to the door illuminated the area, and revealed how little the room was used. Dust covered every inch of every surface that she could see. Grabbing a box from one of the shelves near the entrance, she made a spot at one of the tables in the center of the room and began the tedious job of tracking down who Mr. Cantrell really was. Even though she wasn't reading through every document in depth, the first box still took nearly an hour to clear. Most of the records involved property ownership, with a few marriage and birth records thrown in for good measure. Initially, the plan was to focus on Knox County, but the thought occurred to her that he could have been anywhere in the state or even the world prior to meeting Mark Appleton. The hours flew by, but the boxes seemed to never end. A couple of records included the right surname, but didn't really lead anywhere. As Samantha was getting ready to open another box, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Miss, the office is closing shortly. Please finish up what you're doing and sign out as soon as you can." A friendly-looking older woman with silver hair said before disappearing back into the hallway as Samantha waved her acknowledgement. Cleaning up, she returned to the front desk, signing her name and the time before leaving for the night. Hopefully the next day would bring more luck. A rumble in her stomach reminded her that food was an important part of the day that she hadn't taken time to get in, and that she hadn't taken time to get any. Before returning to her hotel for the night, she stopped at a local burger joint to grab a bite to eat. The waitress took her order and promised to return shortly with the meal, leaving Samantha to her thoughts. Looking around the room, she wondered what Heath was doing at this moment. Was he able to check out more of the property? Had he looked over the contract? Knowing him, she assumed he was probably doing some exploration and trying to get more information about Hermes. She smiled at the thought of Heath trying to keep himself busy in that house, knowing how lost he usually was when she wasn't there, to give him something to do. As Samantha looked around at the throngs of people in the dining room, one of them stood out to her. She recognized the woman, who was now standing and walking toward her, but she couldn't place where she'd seen her. "Miss Samantha, correct? I don't know if you remember me or not," Dee said as she sat down in the seat opposite Samantha. "I believe so. It's Dee, right? Heath is still working on finding your daughter." "Oh, I meant to give him a call. She showed up last week at the room I've been renting here in Columbus. It turns out she was just chasing after a boy," she said, smiling in an almost sinister way as she spoke. "So you don't need our services any longer then?" Samantha asked. "That's right. Persephone is safe and sound and will be heading out tomorrow to go home. I will still be paying for the services you provided, though, even if they were not worth the price. We really did everything we could. Missing people are not our usual cases, but even now, Heath is at a place we've tracked as a potential location for her. I'll call him this evening and let him know that she's turned up." "Thank you, dear. I'll be on my way now. Have a good night." As Dee walked out the door, Samantha couldn't help but feel something was wrong. The feeling stuck with her as she ate and hung around during her drive back to the hotel. She tried to call Heath, but after several rings and no answer, she assumed he had probably gone to bed for the night. Resolving to call the following morning, she laid down herself for what would wind up being a very restless night of sleep. The following morning, she tried to call again, once more getting no answer. She told herself it was likely Heath was keeping occupied with one thing or another, but the feeling in the pit of her stomach wouldn't go away. The only thing she could really do was keep digging and find out who Hermes really was. Returning to the archive building, she signed back in and took up her place in the basement once more. The work of going through boxes was becoming easier as she had established a system to keep them organized, and the morning went by quicker than she expected. As she combed through what she planned to be the last box before a short lunch break, she stumbled on a clue that would crack the whole mystery wide open. In a file that included property records for a family in Cleveland, she discovered a newspaper clipping about a missing boy. There was no picture, but there was a name. Cleveland, Ohio. A boy has been reported missing today by Mr. Jack Slater of Cleveland, Ohio, who resides on 76th Street on the west side. His nephew, 13-year-old Hermes Cantrell of Jackson, Mississippi, was last seen this past Tuesday when he was put to bed. Mrs. Slater awoke Wednesday morning to find the boy's bed empty and his window open. A reward of $500 has been offered to anyone with information that results in the safe return of the child. Digging deeper into the file, Samantha was confident that this was the same Hermes that they had met. There was nothing to indicate whether the boy had been found, and given the little she knew about Mark Appleton, it was entirely possible he had kidnapped Hermes. Following the new lead, she began tracking down more about the Slater family and trying to follow any news that seemed to point toward the missing boy. Jumping around to various boxes with later years, she was unable to find much more to go on. Exasperated and nearing closing time once more, she opened one final box and began digging through it. There were various clippings from old newspapers and files that contained birth and death records dating from the early 1900s through the late 20s. As she was getting ready to put everything back, a name on one of the death certificates caught her eye. Hermes Cantrell. Pulling the old piece of paper out of the bottom of the box, she examined it for several minutes, unable to believe what she was reading. On the line that listed next of kin, there was one name, Mark Appleton, and the line listing date of death read December 13th, 1902. Folding the piece of paper and tucking it in her pocket, Samantha cleaned up the boxes and put everything back before making her way to the car. Doing everything she could to remain calm, she drove back to the hotel and tried calling Heath once more. Rather than an unending ringing, however, she received a notification that the number had been discontinued. Trying again, she received the same message. As quick as she could, she packed her things and checked out of the hotel, starting the drive north as a light rain began peppering her windshield. She had no idea what she was going to do, but she knew she needed to get back to that house and find Heath. As she drove, her mind went over the time in the house over and over as she tried to recall anything that might be helpful when she arrived. What did the man want with Heath? Why would he lie about who he was? The questions swirled in her mind as she was and she was so distracted that she didn't notice the rain picking up or the sign warning of possible high water on the road ahead. Coming over a small hill, she failed to stop before the nose of the car plunged into what appeared to only be a small amount of water on the road. The wheels lost traction, and her car spun around twice before finally coming to a stop in a ditch with ankle-deep water flowing through it. She tried to get out, but the angle of the car meant the driver's door was pinned shut. Just before she passed out, she thought she saw a light in the distance and tried unsuccessfully to call out for help. Opening her eyes and looking around, Samantha realized she was in a hospital. Her head was throbbing, and she could feel the IV in her arm when she tried to move. A dim light above her head illuminated the room just enough for her to see a mural on the wall that read Knox Community Hospital. A clock just above the mural showed the time to be 3:17, although she wasn't sure if that was AM or PM. As she was trying to sit up on the bed, the door to the room opened and a nurse walked in. "Oh my, you're awake! 1 second, dear, let me go get the doctor," she said, turning and walking back into the hall. After only a couple of minutes, the nurse reappeared with a large, older man in a white coat close behind. "Hello, I'm Dr. Spencer. How are you feeling?" "Tired, and my head is killing me. I have to get to Heath," Samantha said, trying once again to sit up. "I'm afraid you aren't going anywhere tonight. You have a fractured leg and some serious head trauma. Do you remember what happened?" Dr. Spencer said as he shined a light back and forth between her eyes. "I was driving, then I saw a light. My boss is in trouble. I need to get to him," she said. She could barely get the words out. "The sheriff will be here in a few minutes. He can help you with that. For now, you need to rest. You were in an accident, and you're lucky to be alive. A state trooper found your car when he was checking road conditions." The doctor was examining her head as he said this, pulling back a bandage and glancing over at the nurse with a frown. The doctor and nurse finished their checks and retreated to the hall once more, leaving Samantha alone in the dark room. A knock on the door several minutes later heralded the arrival of the sheriff. He walked over and sat down in a chair next to the bed after introducing himself as Deputy Ryan. "It's Samantha, right?" "Yes." "Samantha, do you remember how you wound up in that ditch tonight?" "It was raining. I was trying to get to Heath. I think he's in trouble. We found this house off an old dirt road run by this man who said his name was Hermes Cantrell." Samantha explained the whole story to the deputy, covering what had happened the past few days, and asking for any help he could provide. "I remember Heath. He helped me with a case I was working a couple years ago. Nice guy, and very capable. If you say he's in trouble, I want to help any way I can." Samantha provided the address and directions to the house, and Deputy Ryan left to go see what he could find, promising to return as soon as he could. Though still worried, Samantha felt at least somewhat relieved that someone would be going after Heath. As she lay there in the dark, drifting off to sleep, she heard the door in the room open again. "I'm sorry to bother you again, dear. I promise you can rest, but I did need to ask one more thing. We ran blood work when you arrived, routine tests that we run for every new patient. Can you tell me how far along you are, dear?" the nurse said, looking down at the clipboard in her hand. "Excuse me, how far along I am?" "Well, the pregnancy, of course, dear. You did know you were pregnant, didn't you?" Dun dun dun. So lots of craziness, and there's only a couple of chapters left, guys. So make sure you're subscribed, and go over to Patreon if you want to check out the chapters ahead of time, as they're releasing a week ahead of time on Patreon for patrons over there, along with behind the scenes and that kind of stuff. Chapter 21 is going to be coming up soon. Then we have chapter 22. 23 is the final chapter, so we're coming up real close to the end here. And we're also going to be GPS Signal Lost at this point might have been coming out. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do that yet as I sit here recording this. But there's going to be a lot of awesome stuff coming out on the channel. So make sure you're subscribed if you aren't already so you don't miss any of that stuff. I want to thank you all. Hit the like button. Comment below where you think the story is going. What do you think is going to happen? And yeah, that's all I've got. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.